The sun was sinking behind the faraway mountains, painting the Arizona sky in gold and red when Luke Harrison rode back from the far field. His horse was tired. Dust clung to his boots, and the long day had left him silent as always. Luke lived alone on a wide stretch of land, miles away from the nearest town. The only sounds at night were the wind and the coyotes. He liked the quiet. It helped him forget the noise of his past, the war, the losses, the mistakes that still haunted him. He was fixing the broken fence near the dry riverbed when he heard it, a weak sound carried by the wind. It wasn't an animal, it was something human. Faint but real. Luke stopped, his hand frozen on the fence post. He listened again. There it was, a soft cry, a whisper of pain. He pulled his rifle from his saddle and started walking toward the sound, careful and alert. The desert was harsh, full of rocks and dry bushes. He moved quietly, scanning every shadow. Then, behind a fallen log, he saw her, a young Apache girl, barely more than 20. Her skin was pale under the dirt. Her clothes were torn and blood stained her side. She was breathing hard, her eyes half open. When Luke stepped closer, she tried to move, but the pain was too much. He knelt beside her, his eyes filled with concern. "You're hurt," he said softly. Her lips trembled, and her hand reached for something, a small knife too far for her to grab. She looked at him, her eyes dark and steady despite her pain. "I beg you, just make it quick," she whispered. The words hit him like a hammer. Luke froze. For a moment he didn't breathe. He had seen death before, many times, but never had someone asked him for it so calmly. She wasn't begging for help. She was begging for the end. Luke slowly set down his rifle and shook his head. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not doing that." She turned her face away. "You're a rancher, white man. You see an Apache, you shoot." Luke's jaw tightened. Not today. He tore a piece of his shirt and pressed it against her wound. She tried to push his hand away, but she was too weak. "Don't waste time," she muttered, her voice fading. Luke ignored her. He lifted her carefully into his arms. She was light as a bird, and her body trembled against his chest. "Hold on," he said. "You're not dying out here." He carried her to his horse, mounted with effort, and began the long ride back to his ranch. The desert stretched endlessly. The wind was dry and sharp against his face. He could feel her heartbeat, weak against his chest. Every few minutes she stirred, trying to speak, but the words came out as whispers. The sun disappeared and night fell fast. Coyotes howled in the distance. Luke rode harder, guiding his horse through the dark. By the time he reached his small wooden cabin, his arms ached, but he didn't stop. He carried her inside, laid her gently on the bed, and lit the lantern. Her wound was bad, a deep cut from what looked like a blade. Luke cleaned it with warm water, grinding his teeth as she winced in pain. He worked carefully, wrapping clean cloth around her waist. She was half conscious, whispering words in her language that he couldn't understand. When he finished, he sat by the fire, watching her breathe. She looked young, maybe 19 or 20. Her hair was long and black, tangled with dust. Her face, even in pain, had a kind of proud strength that caught his eye. He wondered what she had been through, how she ended up alone and hurt in the middle of the desert. Luke poured some water into a tin cup and went back to her side. "Drink," he said softly. She blinked, looked at him suspiciously, but took a small sip. Then she fell back asleep. He sat there for a long time, staring at the flames. He didn't know why he'd done it. He could have left her there. Nobody would have blamed him. The townsfolk didn't trust the Apache. They called them savages, enemies. But Luke didn't see an enemy. He saw someone who had suffered enough. Maybe it was because he too knew what it felt like to lose everything. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind carried the cry of an owl. Luke took off his hat, rubbed his tired eyes, and looked at her again. She was breathing better now. For the first time that night, he felt relief. The next morning, sunlight filled the cabin. Luke woke up in the chair where he had slept. The girl was still there, her eyes open now, watching him carefully. When he moved, she flinched slightly. "You're awake," he said quietly. "You're safe here." "Why?" she asked in a weak voice. "Why not give me to soldiers? They'd pay you." Luke shook his head. "Don't want their money." She frowned as if she couldn't understand. "You don't know who I am," she said. "Doesn't matter," Luke replied. "You were bleeding, that's all I needed to know." She stared at him for a long time, silent. He could tell she was testing him, looking for some sign of cruelty or lies, but Luke had none to give. He brought her a bowl of water and some bread. She hesitated, but finally ate a few bites. Later that day, Luke stepped outside to tend the horses. He looked toward the hills, thinking about what he had just done. If anyone found out he was keeping an Apache girl under his roof, trouble would come. He could already hear the talk. Luke's gone soft. He's protecting one of them. But deep inside, he didn't care. He had made his choice. When he returned inside, she was sitting up, weak but alert. "Your name?" he asked. "Nia," she said after a moment. "My people call me Naya." "Luke," he said simply. "Luke Harrison." For a few seconds, they looked at each other. Two strangers from worlds that had only known hate. Yet in that small cabin, surrounded by silence and desert dust, something fragile and new began to take shape. That night, as he checked the bandages again, Nia's hand suddenly caught his wrist. Her eyes filled with tears, though she didn't let them fall. "You should have left me," she said softly. "My people are gone. I have nothing." Luke looked at her with quiet strength. "Maybe," he said, "but you're still breathing. That's something." For the first time since he found her, Nia didn't argue. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, she slept without fear. Luke sat by the fires again, his eyes on the flames. The desert outside was cold and endless, but for some reason the cabin didn't feel as empty anymore. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Trouble, danger, maybe worse. But for now, he had done what felt right. He had saved a life. And somewhere deep inside, a part of him that had been buried long ago, the part that believed in kindness, in second chances, had started to wake up again. When the first rays of sunlight fell through the cabin window, Naya opened her eyes slowly. The pain in her side was still sharp, but the warmth of the fire made it easier to breathe. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the rough wooden walls, the worn chair by the fire, and Luke sitting silently near the door, mending a saddle strap. His movements were quiet and careful, as if he didn't want to disturb her. She watched him for a while, unsure of what to think. The man didn't look cruel. His face was sunburned, his clothes simple and dusty. He looked like someone who had carried heavy burdens for a long time. When he noticed her watching, he gave a small nod and said, "Morning." Nia tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Luke poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it. The water felt cool and clean as it slid down her throat. "You should eat something," Luke said after a while. He placed a bowl of warm stew beside her, and the smell made her stomach twist. She hadn't eaten in days. Still, her pride made her look away. "I don't take food from strangers," she said in a quiet but firm voice. Luke didn't argue. He simply said, "Suit yourself," and went back to mending his saddle. The smell of stew filled the cabin. After a few minutes, Naya's hunger won the battle. She took a spoon and began to eat slowly, keeping her eyes on him the whole time. Luke didn't look at her. He gave her space. He had learned that silence could heal better than words. After she finished, she leaned back against the pillow, tired but calmer. Outside, the wind blew softly through the dry grass. The horses neighed in the distance. Luke stepped out to check the barn, and for the first time since she had woken up, Naya was alone. Her eyes searched the small room, a table, a bed, a shelf with a few books, a lamp, and an old rifle hanging on the wall. Everything looked simple, clean, and well cared for. Her gaze fell on the door. It wasn't locked. She could try to run, but her body was still weak. The wound on her side throbbed painfully each time she moved. She looked at the bandage, clean and new. He had changed it while she slept. That thought made her heart twist in confusion. Why would a white rancher help an Apache woman like her? When Luke came back inside, his boots heavy with dust, she was still awake. He placed some logs in the fire and said quietly, "You'll heal faster if you rest. Don't worry, I'm not turning you in." She looked at him sharply. "You don't even know who I am." He met her eyes for the first time. "Don't need to," he said simply. His calmness made her uneasy. People like him usually carried hate in their eyes when they looked at her people. But his eyes held something different, a quiet sadness, the kind that comes from seeing too much death. Days passed slowly. Luke took care of the ranch as usual, feeding the horses, chopping wood, fixing fences. He always left early and came back when the sun went down. Naya spent most of her time resting, but she watched him from the window. His movements were steady, his back straight, his hands rough but gentle with the animals. He didn't ask her many questions. When he did speak, his voice was low and even. "You've got strong will," he said one evening while changing her bandage. "Most wouldn't have survived that kind of wound." Nia looked away. "I'm not most." He smiled faintly. "I can see that." Little by little, the distance between them began to fade. She started helping in small ways, folding his clothes, cleaning the table, feeding the fire when he was outside. Luke noticed but didn't comment. He just left things easier for her, placing water closer to her bed, leaving food when he knew she wouldn't ask. One night, a cold wind swept through the plains. The sound of it whistling around the cabin woke her. She looked toward the fire. It had burned low. Luke was sitting by it, staring into the flames, lost in thought. His eyes looked tired, older than his years. "Why do you live here alone?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Lost someone. Didn't want to be around people." After that, Nia watched the flickering light dance across his face. "Your wife?" she guessed. He nodded slowly. "Long time ago, fever took her." She was silent for a while. "I lost everyone too," she said finally. "My father, my brothers. Soldiers came to our camp. Only I ran." Luke looked at her, his eyes heavy with understanding. "I'm sorry." They said nothing more. But in that quiet moment, they both felt a strange peace, the kind that comes when two souls recognize the same kind of pain. By the end of the week, Nia could walk a little. Luke found her standing outside the cabin, leaning against the doorframe, staring at the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly before her. Red rocks, golden sand, and faraway mountains glowing under the sun. "You shouldn't be out here yet," he said gently. "I needed to see the sky," she replied. "It feels free." Luke nodded. "It is, but it can also be cruel if you're not ready for it." She smiled faintly. "You sound like an elder from my tribe." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I've just lived long enough to listen." Later that day, she tried to help him with the chores. She insisted on feeding the horses, even though she moved slowly. Luke didn't stop her. He just stayed nearby in case she needed help. Watching her stroke the horse's neck with gentle hands reminded him of his late wife, how she used to speak softly to the animals, treating them like friends. The memory hit him hard, but he didn't show it. That night, as they ate by the fire, Nia asked, "Why didn't you do what I asked that day?" Luke looked into the flames for a long time before answering. "Because I've seen too much dying. I used to think mercy meant ending pain. But sometimes mercy means not giving up on someone, even when they've given up on themselves." Nia stared at him, her eyes softening. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. For a moment, she forgot the line that divided their worlds. The next morning, Luke rode to town for supplies. Naya stayed behind, sweeping the floor and feeding the fire. She was still weak, but her heart felt lighter. Yet deep in me, inside, she worried. What if someone in town learned about her? What if they came looking? That evening, when Luke returned, his face looked tense. "They're talking in town," he said quietly. "Someone saw tracks near the river. They think an Apache's been around." Her hands trembled. "You shouldn't have helped me," she said. "They'll come for you." Luke's voice was firm. "Let them come. I don't care what they say." Tears welled in her eyes, but she turned away so he wouldn't see. "You don't understand," she said in a trembling voice. "People like me bring trouble." He looked at her, his expression calm but strong. "Then I guess trouble found the right man. I've got nothing left to lose." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. But in that small cabin, two lonely souls had started to find something they both thought they'd never feel again. A reason to care and a reason to live. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars stretched across the dark sky, Naya lay awake, listening to the sound of Luke's steady breathing from the chair by the door. She whispered to herself in her language, words of thanks she hadn't spoken in years. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since her world fell apart, she didn't feel alone anymore. The days passed slowly, and the bond between Luke and Nia grew stronger, though neither of them said it aloud. The desert around them was wide and silent, but the cabin no longer felt empty. Luke noticed how her laughter had started to return, soft and short, like something she was learning again after a long time. She helped him more each day, gathering firewood, milking the cow, feeding the horses. The wound on her side was almost healed now, and the color had returned to her face. Still, Luke knew danger was near. He could feel it in the way the riders looked at him in town. Rumors were spreading. People said the old rancher was hiding something or someone. The whispers followed him wherever he went. When he passed by the general store, men stopped talking and stared. One of them, a man named Blake, stepped out and said with a cold grin, "You've been keeping company with an Apache, Harrison. That's what folks are saying." Luke looked at him calmly. "Folks say a lot of things." Blake's smile faded. "You best remember who you are, Luke. We don't take kindly to them being near our land." Luke didn't answer. He mounted his horse, his jaw tight, and rode away. The whole ride home, his mind was heavy. He had seen hatred before. It spread fast and burned deep. He knew it wouldn't be long before someone came looking for trouble. When he returned, Naya was outside, hanging close to dry in the warm breeze. She turned when she heard his horse. One look at his face and she knew something was wrong. "They know," she said quietly. He nodded. "Maybe, but I don't care." "You should care," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll hurt you because of me." Luke stepped down and walked to her. "Nia, I've lived through worse than a few angry men. You didn't ask me to save you, but I did. That makes you my responsibility now." She looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of the cloth. "No one ever said something like that to me before." Luke smiled faintly. "Then it's about time someone did." That night, a strange silence filled the cabin. The wind outside was still, the stars bright over the plains. Luke sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. Naya sat across from him, sewing a tear in her dress. The flickering light cast soft shadows between them. "Luke," she said after a long pause, "if they come, will you fight them?" He looked up. "If I have to?" She lowered her eyes. "You could give me to them. They'd leave you alone." He shook his head slowly. "That's not how I live." She didn't reply. But when he looked at her again, he saw tears shining in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. The next morning, the peace shattered. Luke woke to the distant sound of hooves. He stepped outside, the sun barely up, and saw 3 riders approaching. Men from town. His hand rested on his belt as they stopped near the fence. Blake was in front. "Morning, Harrison," Blake said, his tone mocking. "We came to see if the stories are true." Luke said nothing. Blake looked past him toward the cabin. "We just want to make sure you ain't harboring someone dangerous. You know how it goes." Luke's voice was calm but firm. "There's no one here who's dangerous. You can turn around now." Blake laughed. "You always were stubborn, but I ain't leaving till I look for myself." He kicked his horse forward. Before Luke could stop him, the cabin door opened. Naya stepped out, her eyes steady and proud. The morning sun caught the braids in her dark hair. The men froze. "Well, look at that," Blake said with a smirk. "Guess the rumors were true." "You've lost your mind, Harrison." Luke stepped between them. "You'll turn around and leave now." Blake spat in the dust. "You're protecting her, after what her kind's done." Luke's jaw tightened. "She's done nothing wrong. You want to pick a fight? Pick it with me." The men exchanged looks, then pulled their horses around. Blake leaned close and said in a low voice, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." When they were gone, Naya turned to Luke, her face pale. "You shouldn't have done that." "I told you before," he said quietly. "I don't care what they think." That evening, Luke fixed the fence and made sure the rifle by the door was loaded. Naya watched him, her heart heavy with guilt. She had brought danger to his home, the only place she had felt safe in years. As the sun went down, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. The wind picked up, carrying dust and dry leaves. Luke finished his work and walked back inside. He found Naya standing by the window, staring at the dark clouds. "They won't stop," she said. "You know that, don't you?" Luke nodded. "I know." "Then why aren't you afraid?" He gave a small smile. "Because fear never built anything worth keeping." She turned to him, her voice soft but full of feeling. "You risk your life for me, but you don't even know my story." "Then tell me," he said. Nia took a deep breath. "My father was a chief. He taught me to fight, to ride, to hunt. But one night, soldiers came. They said they wanted peace, but they brought fire instead. They took everything. I ran because he told me to. I ran until I couldn't anymore." Her voice broke. "I thought it would be better to do than to live alone." Luke's eyes softened. "You're not alone now." Those words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "I used to hate your people." But you don't act like them. Luke stared into the fire. Maybe because I've seen what hate does. It took my wife, took my peace. I don't want it taking more. The storm outside broke loose, rain pounding against the roof, thunder shaking the walls. But inside, the fire burned steady. They sat together, saying nothing more. But the silence between them was no longer empty. When morning came, the storm was gone. The land smelled fresh, washed clean. Luke stepped outside and found the fence line quiet again. For a brief moment, he hoped the trouble was over. But deep down, he knew better. Later that day, as they worked side by side repairing a water trough, Naya glanced at him and said softly, "If they come again, I will fight too." Luke looked at her, surprised. "You're not healed yet." She straightened her back. "My body is weak, but my heart is strong. I won't hide while you protect me." He saw the fire in her eyes and nodded slowly. "Then we'll stand together." That night, when the stars returned, the ranch was quiet once more. Luke sat on the porch, his rifle resting across his knees, watching the horizon. Naya came out and sat beside him, wrapping herself in a blanket. "You ever think of leaving this place?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "It's my home. I built every piece of it with my hands. Every fence post, every wall. If I walk away now, I lose more than land." She nodded, understanding. "Then I will stay too." He turned to look at her. "That's not what I meant." But she only smiled faintly. "I know, but I choose to." For a long time, they sat there in silence, listening to the wind sweep through the desert grass. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled, and Luke's horse neighed softly in the barn. The night felt different, still dangerous, but also alive with something new. Luke glanced at Naya and saw how the moonlight touched her face. He didn't know what the future held. Maybe more fights, maybe worse. But for now, sitting there beside her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The next few days passed in uneasy calm. Luke kept busy around the ranch, fixing the barn door, checking the water line. But his eyes were always on the horizon. Naya could feel his worry even when he said nothing. Every sunset seemed heavier than the one before, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. One evening, while Luke was stacking hay, he noticed dust rising far in the distance. It was faint but steady. Riders. He watched for a long time, hoping it was nothing, but deep down he knew. He went inside quietly, his face tense. Naya was by the fire, mending a shirt. "They're coming," he said softly. Her hands froze. "How many?" "Couldn't tell," he said, "but they're riding hard." She stood up slowly, her heart pounding. "Then it's time," she said. Luke looked at her. The same girl who once begged for death was now standing straight, strong, and ready. "You sure you want to fight?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm not afraid anymore." He handed her his old rifle. It was heavy, worn from years of use. "You know how to shoot?" She checked the weapon, her movement sure. "My father taught me." Luke gave a small smile. "Then we've got a chance." As night fell, they prepared in silence. Luke moved the horses into the far pen and barred the barn door. Naya filled the lanterns and placed them near the windows. The air was thick with tension, but neither of them spoke of fear. By the time the riders reached the edge of the ranch, the moon had risen. 5 men, their faces hidden under hats, circled near the gate. Luke stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Naya stayed inside, watching through the crack in the wall. "Evening, Harrison," Blake's voice called out from the dark. "We told you this wasn't over." Luke's voice was steady. "You should have listened to me the first time, Blake. Go home." "Can't do that," Blake sneered. "You've been keeping one of them. A savage, right here on your land. We can't allow that." "She's hurt no one," Luke said firmly. "You got no right to be here." "Every right," Blake shouted. "You're protecting the enemy." There was a pause, the kind that comes before something bad. Then Blake raised his gun. "Move aside, Luke." Luke fired first. The bullet struck the dirt near Blake's horse, sending it rearing. The men scattered, shouting. Shots cracked through the air. Glass shattered. Nia ducked, then ran to the back door, grabbing another rifle from the wall. She climbed up to the small loft window and fired once, the sound echoing across the open land. One of the attackers yelped and fell back. The gunfire went on for what felt like forever until the attackers finally retreated into the dark. The desert grew quiet again, except for the wind and Luke's heavy breathing. He leaned against the porch post, clutching his shoulder. Blood trickled down his sleeve. Nia ran to him, her hands trembling. "You're hurt." "It's not bad," he said, though his voice was weak. She helped him inside and pressed a cloth against the wound. Tears filled her eyes as she worked. "Why did you do this for me?" she whispered. "You could have let them take me." He looked at her through the pain. "Because you deserve to live. That's reason enough." Her hands shook harder. "You're bleeding for me," she said softly. "I asked you once to end my life, but you gave me a new one instead." Luke smiled faintly. "Guess I'm stubborn that way." The rain started soon after, falling gently over the wounded land. It washed the dust and blood away from the porch. Inside, the fire burned low, casting a warm glow over them both. Nia stayed beside him all night, changing the cloth, making sure he didn't slip into fever. When morning came, the air was clear, and the smell of wet earth filled the cabin. Luke opened his eyes slowly and found her sitting next to him, half asleep but still holding his hand. "You stayed," he murmured. She nodded. "I wasn't leaving." He smiled weakly. "You did good last night. You kept your head." Her eyes softened. "I remembered what my father taught me. Protect the one who protects you." He tried to sit up, but she pressed him back gently. "Rest," she said. "You've done enough." For the next few days, she took care of him just as he had once cared for her. She fed the horses, fetched water, and cooked simple meals. When he tried to thank her, she only smiled and said, "Now we're even." But deep down, both of them knew it wasn't just gratitude. Something stronger had taken root between them. Something quiet but unbreakable. One afternoon, Luke sat outside, his arm in a sling, watching the sunset. Naya came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. Luke looked toward the horizon. "Maybe, but I don't think they'll try again soon." "What if they do?" she said. He took a slow sip and said, "Then we'll face it like we did before." She smiled faintly. "Together." "Together," he said. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the soft hum of the wind. Then Naya spoke again. "You changed my life, Luke. You showed me there's still good in people." He turned to her. "You changed mine too. I forgot what it meant to care about someone again." Her eyes glistened. "You cared when you found me. You just didn't know it yet." That night, as stars filled the sky, Nia lit the fire and watched the flames dance. She remembered the girl who had once begged for death. Weak, frightened, lost. That girl was gone now. In her place stood a woman who had fought, who had found purpose, and who had someone to protect. Luke watched her quietly from his chair, a calm warmth spreading in his chest. The fear and loneliness that had ruled his life for years were fading. In their place was something steady and real. Trust. Outside, the land stretched endlessly, silent under the moonlight. Inside, 2 souls who had once been broken now shared one small light that refused to fade. When Naya turned and met his eyes, she saw the same quiet strength that had once carried her from death's edge. And in that silent exchange, they both understood what words could not say. They had saved each other. Weeks passed, and the land slowly healed from the storm and the fight. The grass began to grow again after the rain, and the air smelled clean and alive. Luke's wound closed little by little, though his shoulder remained stiff. He didn't complain. He never did. Nia stayed close, helping him with the work he couldn't do. The two of them moved through their days in quiet rhythm, like the land and the wind had finally learned to live together again. Every morning, Luke would rise before dawn, feed the horses, and bring water from the well. Naya would light the fire, make coffee, and cook breakfast. Their words were few, but their eyes said enough. There was peace between them, a kind that didn't need to be spoken out loud. Sometimes when the chores were done, they would sit on the porch and watch the horizon. The sun would paint the desert gold, and the silence between them felt soft, like an old song. Naya often looked at the sky and said, "When I was little, my mother told me the sky never forgets kindness." Luke would smile quietly at that. One evening, Luke rode to town for supplies. Nia stayed behind, tending to the animals. The ride was long and dusty, and when he arrived, the townsfolk greeted him with mixed looks, some curious, some cold. The storekeeper, an older man named Grant, watched him carefully as he gathered flour, beans, and tools. "Word is you scared off Blake and his boys," Grant said as he weighed the flour. Luke didn't look up. "They came looking for trouble. They found what they came for." Grant sighed. "You've always been a fair man, Luke. Folks are starting to see that. Some even think maybe that girl of yours ain't what they said. Luke's eyes lifted slowly. She's not my girl. She's just someone who needed help. Grant gave a small smile. Maybe so, but helping her might have done you some good too. Luke didn't answer, but deep down he knew the man was right. He rode home under the stars, thinking of the life waiting for him in that small cabin. The quiet laughter, the sound of her voice, the warmth that filled the place. When he reached home, Nia was sitting outside near the fire pit roasting corn. She stood when she saw him, relief washing over her face. You took long, she said. Town talked too much, he replied with a small smile. She laughed softly and handed him some food. The night air was cool and the stars shone brighter than ever. After they ate, she handed him a small wooden carving, an eagle with its wings spread wide. I made this, she said quietly. My father used to carve them. It means strength and freedom. Luke turned it in his hands, feeling the smooth wood under his fingers. It's beautiful, he said. Thank you. It's for you, she said, for saving me, for giving me a place when I had none. He looked at her gently. You don't owe me anything, Naya. She shook her head. Maybe not, but this isn't about owing. It's about respect. He smiled and nodded. Then I'll keep it close. From that day on, the small carving stayed on his desk right beside a picture of his late wife. But when he looked at it, he didn't feel guilt anymore. He felt peace. Days turned into weeks, and soon the world began to forget what had happened. The men from town stopped coming. The fences stayed whole, and the cattle grew fat again. Nia often sang softly while she worked, old songs from her tribe. Her voice floated through the air, gentle and warm. Sometimes Luke would stop what he was doing just to listen. One morning, while fixing the roof, Luke noticed her out in the field, kneeling in the dirt, planting something small. He climbed down and walked over. What are you doing? He asked. She smiled. Planting corn. My people say if you plant something where there was blood, it brings life back. Luke looked at the patch of land, remembering the fight, the fear, the noise. You think it'll grow? He asked. She nodded. It always does when you care enough. Months later, the corn rose tall and green under the sun. The land that once saw hate now carried life again. Every time Luke passed the field, he felt something shift inside him, something gentle, like forgiveness. One evening, a group of travelers stopped by the ranch asking for water and rest. Luke welcomed them without hesitation. Among them was an older Apache man. When he saw Naya, he stopped, surprise and emotion filling his eyes. Child, he said softly, we thought you were gone. She ran to him, tears streaming down her face. Uncle, she cried. Luke stepped at him, giving them space. They spoke in their language for a long time, voices low and full of feeling. When they finished, Naya turned to Luke. He is my mother's brother, she said with a smile. He was looking for the few of us who survived. Luke nodded. You found family again. Her smile faded a little. They're leaving in the morning. They want me to go with them. For a moment, the world went quiet. Luke's heart felt heavy, but he didn't show it. You should, he said softly. They're your people. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face. And what about you? She asked. I'll be fine, he said, forcing a small smile. The ranch needs work as always. That night, she packed her few things, folding each piece of cloth with care. Luke watched from the doorway, saying nothing. When she finished, she turned to him. You saved my life, Luke. You gave me a reason to live again. I'll never forget that. He nodded, his throat tight. You've got a strong spirit, Naya. Go where you belong. But as dawn broke and her uncle's group prepared to leave, Nia stood still beside the horse. The sun rose over the hills, bathing the ranch in golden light. She looked at the open road ahead, then back at the cabin, the walls she had helped repair, the field she had planted, the man who had never turned away from her. Her uncle called her name, but she shook her head. My place is here, she said quietly. Luke's eyes widened in surprise. You sure about that? She smiled softly. Yes, this is my home now. The travelers nodded with understanding and rode away. Leaving a trail of dust behind them. Luke stood there silent until Naya turned and walked back toward him. I thought you'd go, he said. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. I did too. But sometimes home isn't where you were born. It's where you're cared for. Luke's voice was low. You'll always have a home here, Naya. That evening they sat by the fire, the orange glow dancing between them. The sound of crickets filled the night. Naya rested her head lightly on his shoulder, and for the first time in many years, Luke felt something pure, not loneliness, not loss, but peace. The days ahead were calm. The ranch thrived again, the cornfield golden and strong. Travelers sometimes passed by and told stories of the old rancher and the Apache woman who ran the land together. Two souls from different worlds who had found family in each other. Luke never cared about what people said anymore. When the sun rose each morning and Naya stepped outside to greet the day, he knew that everything they had suffered had led them exactly where they were meant to be. And as the desert wind swept softly through the fields, carrying the scent of new life, Luke would look at the small eagle carving on his desk and smile. It reminded him that mercy, once given freely, could turn strangers into family, and pain into something that finally felt like peace. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't pulling a trigger. It's choosing not to, when every voice around you screams that you should. Luke found Nia bleeding and broken, begging for death because the world had convinced her she no longer belonged in it. In that moment, he could have walked away, could have ended her pain the way she asked, could have protected his quiet, lonely life from trouble. But instead, he carried her home. He chose mercy over fear, kindness over hatred, and life over the easy silence of indifference. That single choice didn't just save Naya, it saved Luke too. Two shattered souls divided by history, prejudice, and blood. I discovered that healing doesn't come from revenge or separation. It comes from refusing to let someone else's pain harden your own heart. They learned that real family isn't always born. Sometimes it's built, one stubborn act of compassion at a time. In a world that still tries to teach us to fear the other, this story whispers a deeper truth. The moment you decide someone deserves to live, even when the whole world says they don't, you begin to live again yourself. Mercy isn't weakness. It's the bravest rebellion there is. So tell me in the comments, has there ever been a time when someone showed you unexpected kindness when you felt completely lost? Or when you chose compassion even though it was the harder road? Share your story. I read every single one. If this touched your heart at even a little, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because every week we share real stories that remind us humanity is still worth believing in. You never know whose life your kindness might save tomorrow. Maybe even your own.